big news today. Moderna has put in for the EUA, the big EUA, for kids under the age of 6 months to 6 years old. They're asking the FDA, give us the emergency use authorization. We want to be able to deliver our product. It's 25 micrograms times 2. And they have the results of their randomized control trial, Kids Covid. And basically what it finds is in the two different age groups, a 51% reduction in centrally confirmed RT-PCR COVID and a 37% reduction. But the 95% confidence interval for both of those goes down below 30. And one, it goes to 21, and the other goes to 13%. And that's a wide confidence interval that dips pretty low. So there's going to be a lot of things to talk about. Number one, when we set off on this journey towards SARS-CoV-2 vaccinations, the FDA was pretty clear in guidance that they wanted to see from a vaccine an improvement in symptomatic SARS-CoV-2 of at least 50%. Show me a 50% vaccine efficacy. And also make sure that the lower bound of the 95% confidence interval is above 30%. That will give you some confidence that it's at least that good. And that's important because the moment you debut a vaccine, if it's very, very poor vaccine efficacy, you actually could get a paradoxical problem when risk compensation goes through the roof immediately thereafter. And I think John Ioannidis talked about that in his lecture video in this channel and on my podcast. But back to this point. Right now, there's a fraction of parents who are really, really keen and eager for this. And if I were to guess how big that fraction is, I would guess it's probably 1 in 5. It's about 20%. And the reason I guess that number is that's very similar to the number that had the rapid uptake for kids 5 to 11. It's probably around the same kind of parents. But that means 80% of parents are the kind of let's see how this goes kind of space. And so that 20% is quite vocal on social media. But the 80%, let's not forget about those people. And the 20% really wants this vaccine available, and Moderna is filing that EUA. And this is different than what the regulators had said. The regulators said, we're not going to wait. We're going to wait until the summer and look at Moderna and Pfizer side by side. And they may still pull it off. They may still do so. We shall see. And I think they like that idea because the Pfizer series is 3 micrograms times 3, and Moderna is 25 times 2. And so they might be wondering if, as in adolescence, in the adolescent situation, it is clear that Pfizer has a better adverse event profile for an adolescent boy than Moderna. And they might be wondering what the adverse event profile will be in this age and if there's a difference. And I don't know if it's product dependent or dose dependent, but they might be wondering that. And so that's probably why they want to see it side by side. They're also probably aware at the FDA that the actual risk to a child in this age range is actually very, very low. I know we feel like it's so high, but often the vaccinated and boosted parent has still a higher risk of bad outcomes from SARS-CoV-2 than the child. And one thing makes that even lower, which is we have CDC estimate in the last week that the seroprevalence in kids is really high. It's like 75% now in the CDC's new study. And, that's just one study. It could be a little bit lower. It could be a little bit higher depending on the study you do. That's very high, and you always ask yourself in biomedicine, am I able to make someone better off? And the old saying is it's hard to make a healthy person better off. And another saying is, it's hard to make somebody who's had and recovered from an illness even better off by vaccinating for that illness they just had and recovered for. I think that's very hard. And so the absolute benefits might get smaller and smaller as the population has pre-existing immunity. And we know that from a number of studies that show people who've had COVID and cleared COVID are much less likely to get so sick from COVID the second time or third time they get COVID. So put all this together, and I think you have a very important regulatory decision. I think if the FDA was sticking to what they said initially, they might be reticent about this approval because the confidence interval crosses the boundary that they set. And in one case, the point estimate of efficacy is below what they said they wanted. But the FDA might be more permissive and they might say, what we're doing here is what people call an immunobridging strategy. Immunobridging. People keep talking about this. I'm not sure they know what it means, but here's what it means. It means you do your first randomized control trial in adults and you show to me you improved symptomatic SARS-CoV-2. Check, they did it. Check, they did it. Pfizer and Moderna. Then, as you go down in age, I'm going to let you have it. If you merely show non-inferior geometric mean antibody titers, I'm going to let you have that approval if you show me that you are getting those antibodies comparable to what you get in adults. I'm not asking you to prove anymore that improves symptomatic disease. I'm not even asking you to show severe disease reduction. And I think that's a bit of a gamble. I mean, it makes sense if those studies occur like immediately thereafter the primary study. But as you get further and further away, a year out or even longer, and basically you're dealing with slightly different disease because now we have Omicron and we didn't have that back in the immediate aftermath of the first approval. You have to wonder if those antibodies mean the same thing. And you have to wonder if it means the same thing in kids. And so I think it's a lot of uncertainty. It's just a classic surrogate endpoint in medicine. A surrogate endpoint is an endpoint a patient didn't know mattered until the doctor said it mattered. Like you didn't know your A1C mattered, or you didn't know your LDL cholesterol mattered until the doctor told you it mattered. And you didn't know your geometric mean antibody titer against the spike protein mattered until the FDA told you it mattered. It's not something you feel. And it's problematic because not that surrogate endpoints are always wrong. They're often faithful and useful. It's that they're not always faithful and useful. And the trouble is, we don't know which time is which. And this will lead to a lot of consternation at the FDA. Now, I see people writing long threads where they say immunobridging has been proven to be successful. They're just making things up. I mean, we just don't have data to render a firm conclusion on the immunobridging regulatory strategy. That would require huge randomized control trials to confirm that the immunobridging was true. They hang their hat on observational studies, but the observational studies they're citing are studies in older people that actually don't apply to the immunobridging question. That's one. Some observational studies that do apply to the question are grievously confounded, with the classic confounding that the kid who's rushed to the doctor's office to get that shot is very different than the kid whose parents are reticent, and it's not randomly allocated. And so you can't separate the parent protection cocoon effect from the vaccine effect. And if you make those kind of comparisons, they're notoriously unreliable and flawed. And yet I see people make those comparisons. They make those comparisons. But you have to acknowledge that the beauty of randomization is we all know that there are vastly different attitudes about COVID-19 risk. It's like the old George Carlin bit, which is that anyone who drives faster than you on a freeway is a maniac, and everyone who drives slower than you is an idiot. And we all feel that way about our own personal choices. Like, I'm happy to go to restaurants. I'm happy to go to dinner parties. Other people might like to go to dinner parties, but not restaurants, or they might test before they go. Everyone has their own speed, and they all think the people who do more than they are maniacs, and the people who do less are idiots. I think people feel that way. So when you have this bias that the parental behavior may be different, you just cannot separate the vaccine effect from the types of people who are seeking it out. And that's a problem with the fourth dose studies. That's the problem with all these observational studies. And to say immunobridging has been validated is a foolish thing to say because we just don't know that to be true. I think it's clear that the 20% of people who are keen and eager on getting this vaccine really, really want it. And so they're happy to see, with rose-colored glasses, these data. But the 80% of people who want data and more data and are reluctant are unlikely to be persuaded. And I'm very curious what the FDA does because I think they really do want to see Pfizer and Moderna side by side before they make a decision. And I think Moderna wants to press them to make a decision quick so that they can get the market share. But I think if I were running the FDA, I would probably wait to see both side by side and have a couple of important advisory meetings to let all these data be heard. And I think we should have a broad discussion about it because with 75% of people who've already had COVID and recovered, it's going to be very hard to make those kids better off. They're already not just probably, they are, in fact, marvelously protected against the fact that if they got COVID a second time, that they would be hospitalized. They already had sort of great odds going into it. A healthy child who's already had and recovered from COVID has even better odds if they were to meet COVID again. And that's data from Shamez Ladani, who came on this podcast and talked about a UK data. So those are my thoughts on this. It's going to be a very important regulatory thing. Some people say what do you expect would happen to antibodies over time if we didn't do this? I was like, listen, this is not how drug regulation works. You don't tell yourself a Rudyard Kipling's Just So story of why the giraffe has a long neck. You have to actually figure out your target population and run a randomized trial and show me a benefit. That's how regulatory science works. We can all tell stories. You can tell a story why it works, and I can tell a story why it doesn't work, but we need data, not stories. So if you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. Until next time.